10 years ago, in 2011, the superhero movie genre was going through some big changes. We were living in a post-Sam Raimi Spider-Man world, and it was time to truly challenge the public perception of superhero movies. It was time to push boundaries, overcome expectations, and blow everyone away with something amazing. And as the MCU was in its infancy, with Thor 1 and Captain America both being released in 2011, the boys over at DC decided to hit back hard with their next big superhero blockbuster. They hit back with... well, it was certainly a movie that became memorable. On June 15th, 2011, the superhero movie fandom was given... Green Lantern. Hey guys, my name is DJ, and exactly 1 decade ago, the world was treated to what has gone on to become one of the most infamous superhero movies of all time in Green Lantern. A movie that made $219 million at the box office, just barely breaking even before breaking the minds of many, as the movie was widely panned by critics from both inside and outside the superhero bubble. But was it really as bad as they say? I mean, kinda. However, instead of telling you each little thing that I didn't like about the movie, I decided that I would just show you. So today, let us dive on in as we talk about and dissect the now infamous Green Lantern movie. Now, every universally beloved movie kicks off with, of course, opening exposition. And personally, I don't really mind this exposition too much. Yes, I understand that this is the quote show don't tell medium, but this movie has a lot to explain in a short amount of time, so I think that this is acceptable. Even if that opening monologue is a bit difficult to follow because of just how much needs to be crammed in. But to sum it all up, it's basically there to explain, 1, that Parallax is the main villain of this movie, and 2, who the Green Lanterns are. And of course, all of this is done with CGI. Now, I wouldn't normally bring this up, but one of the main criticisms from many people that I'll cover more later is the overabundance of special effects throughout the movie. And while I don't really have too much of a problem with them, I will say that this shot here kind of broke me. Like, I know this is gonna sound weird, but I couldn't help but see Parallax as one of those flying ghost heads in the Scooby-Doo movie, which, even then, just looked like flying little sperms. Anyways, following that odd comparison in my head, we move back over to Earth. And of course, what's a superhero origin story these days without some dead parents? So, a young Hal Jordan, our main character, decides to skip school to hang out with his dad all day at a test flight for some new military jet. That is, before proceeding to watch as his father just crashes into the ground and explodes. I guess even John Tenney would rather be in a plane crash than be in this movie. But after that sad and emotional moment, I guess, we move back into space with Parallax attacking Ivan Ooze from the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie. That is, before this now dying Green Lantern heads towards Earth. By the way, if it seems as though I'm rushing through some stuff, that's because almost none of this has really been that interesting thus far. I mean, nothing terrible has happened, but nothing spectacular either. But to move on, we now head over to cool guy Ryan Reynolds, aka Hal Jordan. He sleeps with hot chicks, he's got a cool orange car, and he's basically the protagonist in every late 2000s movie all rolled into one. So, he's a tool. Yeah, he's a fucking tool. Anyways, so, Hal is on his way to work, and oh, by the way, in case you're wondering, we're about 15 minutes into the movie, and, like, none of this has been interesting. Maybe I'm too busy looking through the lens of someone from 2021, but most of this movie thus far has been pretty dull. Everything on Earth so far has felt like it's come from an entirely different movie, and for a Green Lantern movie, you wouldn't really think it'd be this boring. Anyways, Hal is on his way to work and continues to act like a total prick. He's late to his job, he makes some really stupid decisions when flying a new goddamn military plane, and he really doesn't give me the vibe of someone qualified for this job. I understand that the point of these scenes is to establish that he's a total dick, but this never really changes throughout the movie. So, when he gets yelled at by his boss for crashing a goddamn plane, it's really hard to see his perspective for ruining the entire presentation. But of course, Hal is a good guy at heart, right? I mean, he's the hero of the story. So, to showcase that he's still a good guy, Hal decides to head off to a kid's birthday party. Which, now that I say that out loud, that does sound kind of weird. Of course, as soon as he walks in, he gets chewed out by everyone because he totally deserves it, but he shows up at the party nonetheless. And Hal starts giving this kid an inspirational speech about how you shouldn't be scared of anything. You should be fearless and courageous in the face of danger. Except, you know, maybe that kid wouldn't be so scared if he didn't just see you try to almost kill yourself in a plane crash. However, following that complete stupidity with Hal Jordan, it's now time that we finally start getting to the Green Lantern stuff. A quarter into the movie. Oh, and don't worry, it's still not that interesting. Like, this major scene of the movie doesn't feel as serious and epic as it probably should be. I don't quite know how to explain it, it's more about how the scene feels, but just know that it doesn't feel that great. So, Hal Jordan gets lifted into the air and flown all the way to where our Ivan Ooze Green Lantern is slowly dying on Earth. Hal's unsure of what to do, but the Green Lantern tells Hal to take his ring and the lantern with him as he has been chosen for great things. Hooray! Hal Jordan can finally become the Green Lantern, which is perfect timing because the single best character in this entire movie is here to take his place. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Sinestro. And actually, I have it written down in my notes right here. Let me just pick this up. There we go. Sorry to look so unprofessional. Sinestro is fucking great. He's easily the best character in this movie. This one scene is more interesting and more well acted than every other scene in this movie. I looked up who plays him, and it's Mark Strong. Holy shit. I was like, who is this obscure actor? And I didn't expect to see Mark Strong. God damn, he melts into this role. So yeah, I really like Sinestro. As for the entire scene, it's just Sinestro talking to the Lantern Guardians about how Parallax is coming. But the whole performance of Sinestro is rad as hell, and it must be appreciated. And speaking of solid performances, we cut back over to Earth where we see the introduction of another somewhat interesting character in Hector. So, Hector is a scientist who was brought in to analyze this now deceased Green Lantern alien. Meanwhile, at the same time, Hal Jordan is starting to mess with his own Green Lantern gear, and these two scenes sorta take turns combining into one. This is a trope that we see a lot between these two characters throughout the movie, and I'm actually a fan of it. As Hector starts to turn into this villain being corrupted by the Parallax ooze in the alien, no pun intended, Hal starts to turn into the hero of the movie, and I kinda like it. Also, I don't really care what anyone says. Hal saying the Green Lantern Oath is pretty freaking awesome. Like, for the first time, this movie is really starting to feel like a Green Lantern movie. Everything else has been boring, human bullshit, but now it's time to finally start focusing on the cool alien stuff. So, let's go right back to boring human bullshit. Now, this next scene features Hal and his very, and you could bold and underline very here, very forced love interest in Carol Ferris. These two have some little drunken dance at the bar and they reminisce, and it comes pretty out of left field in my opinion. Like, I hate to sound like one of those typical guys who doesn't like romance in movies, but this whole movie would be pretty unaffected and maybe even a bit more interesting without this whole romance between Hal and Carol. And when I say this comes out of left field, I mean the entire scene as well. Like, you go from this really cool moment where Hal is finally becoming the Green Lantern, and you turn it back over to just a boring conversation between two humans. But hey, at least we jump back into some cool Green Lantern stuff after this, which is something. So, following this awkward conversation in the bar, Hal turns to leave before being jumped by a few men who were fired after his dumb plane crash thing from earlier. But since Hal now has his new power of alien marriage, he uses his wedding ring to send these reasonably angry men flying into the air. And I guess this summons the Lantern people to bring Hal back up to their Green Lantern planet to be tested? So, following this abduction, after fighting off his fellow co-workers, Hal wakes up to discover that he can now be a Green Lantern. And this is where most people start to just laugh at the movie, because this is when Hal gets his fully CGI Green Lantern suit. Now, I know this is gonna upset some people, but I actually think the CGI suit is kinda cool, I guess? I know it's kind of the most hated part of the movie, but I actually like the idea. Maybe it doesn't look realistic at all, but the idea of a CGI suit for Green Lantern really does fit. And speaking of things that look really unrealistic yet somehow fine, let's talk about the aliens for a second, because during this scene, we meet Tomar-Re, and in my opinion, Tomar-Re looks kinda cool. All the aliens look kinda cool, in fact. Even if most of them look like they belong in a PS3 game and not a $200 million movie. But it's okay. As for the main scene itself, though, I guess the main problem for me is that everything feels really rushed. In the span of only a few minutes, Hal gets the Green Lantern suit, has to learn exactly what the Green Lanterns are, has to understand that humans are very much not the only species in the universe, and has to go through this Green Lantern speech with Sinestro. I don't know, I guess the main problem for me is that we're already an hour into this movie, and it feels like most of what I've seen thus far really doesn't matter. So for actually interesting scenes, like all the stuff on the Green Lantern planet, I guess it just makes everything feel really rushed because I've seen so much uninteresting stuff already. Except for this next scene that is arguably the best scene in the entire movie. Because following all of this, Hal goes on to start training. And by training, I mean get his ass whooped by the thickest alien lantern I have ever seen. Oh, sweet Poppy, look at how his entire body just claps.
I like 'em big, I like 'em chunky.
Okay, in all seriousness though, I do believe that Hal training as a lantern against both the Big Clump and Sinestro is the best scene in the entire movie. I know it may be really fake looking CGI, but I still like this entire scene. It sort of visually shows Hal's weaknesses while showcasing exactly what the lantern rings can do. But then again, maybe it's just because Sinestro is the best damn character in the movie. His whole vibe screams, I'm the coolest guy in this movie, and I'm absolutely here for it. Hell, even Hal has a good moment here where he actually starts to doubt himself. Like, his entire douchey character really starts to crack as his ribs crack during the fight. And speaking of people cracking, let's see how our boy Hector is doing.
Did you just call me a loser?
So, yeah, I guess Hector can now read minds and use the Force. Cool, I guess. But now it's time to go back to space, where we see some choice Green Lanterns looking to wage war against Parallax. And while this whole scene could be really freaking cool, there's just one main problem. It's way too short. It's like, I don't know, 30 seconds? It just feels like it should be way more epic. Again, this is another case of everything in the movie now feeling super rushed. The fight with Parallax and the Lanterns, the explanation of who Parallax is, and most of the other scenes in this movie past the 1 hour mark really feel like they should be a tad bit longer. However, as the movie continues to sprint back and forth between planets, it's now time to go back to Earth in what is probably the first actually compelling scene on the planet. There is this big party scene with all of our main human characters interacting with each other, which I kinda like. You can see the good and bad parts of each character, with Andy Dufresne, aka Hector's dad, clearly not accepting his son, Hal trying to compliment Hector before going on to hit on his love interest, and with Hector starting to fall down this pit of despair as he gets drunk and spoils the secret about his work with Earth's first alien life. Hell, we even get some Green Lantern action as Hector straight up tries to kill his dad before he is saved by Hal in his first true appearance as Green Lantern. Oh, and since Hal is the good guy and the superhero always gets the girl, he also saves Carol as well with the most gentle hug of all time. However, after all those fun party shenanigans, we move over to see that Hector, well, he's not looking too good. Do you remember that one episode of Jimmy Neutron where Sheen's brain just kept growing bigger and bigger until his head was absolutely massive? Well, it seems as though Hector has decided to model his appearance after him as he transforms into this weird monster thing. However, while Hector is starting to go through this transformation, we also watch as Hal starts to transform into a superhero by going through all these typical superhero things. First, Hal is forced to show off his Green Lantern suit to his friend that I still can't remember the name of, and then Hal decides to have a bit of an awkward conversation with the love interest. And I could go on and tell you more about these two scenes, but this video is getting long enough, and I just really don't care enough to talk about them. Hal has a friend, and he has a girl. That's basically the gist of those two scenes. But now we get back to the more exciting stuff of this movie, as Hector is then captured by the government. So, since Hector is now turning into a picture of your dad, it's ironic enough that he gets captured and taken away by his own dad and some government officials. And while most of this movie has felt very much like just a series of events with no real natural payoff, I will say that this scene feels pretty natural. Hector being mad at his dad, him being brought in by the government after talking about the alien at the party, all of it feels right. And then, when he attacks his dad and the government officials, all of it feels natural there too. Like, of course he's gonna use his new force powers to fight back against the people trying to kill him. Of course that's gonna happen. And all of this basically leads into a bit of a tussle between Green Lantern and Hector. Not only that, but Hector and Hal also have another one of those duality scenes that I really like, with Hector and Hal laying next to each other as they continue to question how they both ended up so differently. I don't really know what else to say. I just really like the duality stuff. Anyways, now it's time for the Lanterns to explore their own duality. You see, now that they fully understand the power of parallax, Sinestro goes on to create a yellow ring, believing fear to be more powerful than will when dealing with parallax. But sadly, Hal decides to interrupt and say some inspirational speech about the power of humanity's will, so we don't get to see this super cool yellow ring in action. Which kinda sucks, but I guess this whole scene that teases a yellow ring was meant to be a tease for the eventual sequel that was never released. And as for the speech itself, I mean, I guess it's fine. I don't know, around this time of the movie, I was definitely on autopilot, not to put a pun in there, pilot, you know, he's an airplane person thing. It's a funny joke. The point is, Hal wants to be a good guy and stop Parallax himself. But first, he has to deal with Hector. So, Hector has decided to take Carol hostage because, of course, he did, and Green Lantern has to stop him. And for this scene, Hal decides to offer Hector the Green Lantern ring in exchange for Carol, which is perhaps the smartest thing he's done in this movie. Because since the Green Lantern ring can only be really controlled by the person it chooses, Hal understands that Hector can't really hurt him in case he's lying. Which, of course, he does lie, and Hal stops him before going on to save Carol. But then Parallax shows up. And holy shit, Parallax disintegrates and eats Hector. Like, this is the most terrifying fucking thing I've seen in a superhero movie in a hot minute. Parallax not only eats him, but quickly evaporates him. So after seeing that, Hal makes a very smart decision and grabs Carol so they both can get out of there. And now, Parallax is on Earth. And it's time for the goddamn apocalypse. Parallax starts to fucking disintegrate everyone and consume them. All of these people in the city are being destroyed, and this is both terrifying and slightly hilarious to me. But before Parallax can consume too many people, Hal decides to swoop in and we finally get to the big climactic fight of the movie. And it's weirdly kind of boring. Like, my dude looks at this giant cloud alien and goes, "I'ma hit you with asteroids and space satellites because that will obviously kill you," before finally looking at Parallax and punching him once to send him crashing into the sun. And if that seems like not a lot happened, well, that's because not a whole lot happened. The entire climactic fight literally lasts a little over 5 minutes.
5 minutes!
Sure, there's a speech about Hal winning the day and all the Green Lanterns shoot some cool rays into the sky, but essentially, that's it for the movie. So, we finally get to the big question. Is this movie really as bad as everybody says it is? Well, I'd say yes and no. I mean, I don't know. This movie kinda just makes me feel nothing. I'm not super angry, but I sure as hell never want to watch this movie again. Don't get me wrong, I totally see why people hate this movie, but at the end of the day, I kinda just feel nothing. And maybe that's a bit worse. Typically, when there's a bad movie, you can usually find some enjoyment in just how bad it is. Usually, you can find some laughs throughout. And while there may be a few key moments here and there that one could laugh at, it's not enough to make me feel anything significant. It's weirdly bland and mediocre, but not in a fun way. It doesn't warrant a sequel, but it also doesn't really offer an interesting experience. The Green Lantern movie is just not fun. Thank you all so much for watching this little breakdown of the Green Lantern movie. What do you guys think? Do you believe that this movie is truly as bad as everyone says it is? Or do some of you actually like this movie? Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. But until next time, have a good day. Bye-bye.